What's going on, everybody? Ronnie DiMaggio here, product specialist at BMW of Morristown, and in today's video we are doing a comparison test between this 2024 BMW X5 and this 2023 BMW X7. So both of these cars, don't let those model years confuse you, both of these cars have both recently been redesigned, or LCI'd, life cycle impulse in BMW terms. They have both been refreshed, and 2024 is the newest X5, 23 is currently the newest X7. Obviously 24 X7s are on the way, but these are the ones that you'll see when you walk into a showroom. So we thought it might be useful for you guys who might be considering buying an X5 or an X7 to see how they stack up. So we're going to go over the engine and powertrain differences. We'll talk about the sizing differences. That is a big one. A big differentiator between these two cars is their dimensions, both interior and exterior, how you might fit in the front back seat. We'll also talk about cargo space and fuel economy and all of those things that might be relevant to you if you're comparing the X5 to the X7. Now, if you would like a comparison of X3 versus X5, we have already done that. That was our first car comparison. We'll link to that video in a little pop-out card here if you're interested in watching that. But in this video, we're doing X5 versus X7 to see which BMW SAV is right for you. So let's get started under the hood of each car, talking about their engines. All right, here we are under the hood of the 2024 X5. Now, as you're about to soon learn, it doesn't really matter which car we're under the hood of, because the engines and powertrain options, both how they're spec'd out in these two specific cars and how they're available to be spec'd out through your BMW dealer, are very, very similar. So we'll start with the entry-level powertrain with both cars, which is what we see here. This is an X5 xDrive 40i. This is an X7 xDrive 40i. So both of those trim levels, the 40i versions of both X5 and X7, use the exact same 3-liter turbocharged inline-6 engine with a 48-volt mild hybrid system. In both applications, they make 375 horsepower, and they are sharing all of the same parts. So it is the same engine and transmission in both cars, X5 and X7 for 40i variants. Now, you can step up to a V8 in both cars, and with the V8, there are actually some differences. So with the X5, you can go up to the M60, which is a 4.4-liter twin-turbo V8, the S68. That makes 523 horsepower. Now, the same is also true with the X7. You can step up to the M60 and get that 4.4-liter twin-turbo V8 with 523 horsepower. So, again, M60, same on each. 40i, same on each. Now, the difference is with the X5, you can step up to the X5M competition, which has the same or a similar S68 V8, but it makes 617 horsepower. So you cannot get an X7M. So the upgraded version of the V8 in the X5 exists, whereas it does not in the X7. Now, you can, in the X7, go up to the Alpina XB7, which has 630 horsepower out of a 4.4-liter bi-turbo V8. Still two turbos. Alpina just calls it bi-turbo, whereas BMW and M call it twin-turbo. So you can go up to a more powerful V8 in the X7, but it is not an X7M, it's an Alpina XB7. So those are the powertrains, all 8-speed automatics, and you can get the X5 in rear-wheel drive, where the X7 is all-wheel drive only. However, all of them in the Northeast here in Morristown, New Jersey, are usually spec'd in all-wheel drive. So to summarize, you have 40i variants, 375 horsepower, turbocharged inline-6, identical between each car. You have the M60 variants, which are identical to each car. They are 4.4-liter twin-turbo V8s, 523 horsepower. Then with the X5, you can go up to X5M competition, 617 horsepower V8. Or with the Alpina, the X7, you can step up to the Alpina 630 horsepower V8. Now with the X5, you can also option a hybrid. So the X5 comes in hybrid, the X7 does not, and I'm not talking about the mild hybrid that all of the X5s and X7s have now, but the actual plug-in hybrid that's available for X5. That is called the X550E, and it makes 483 horsepower out of the same inline-6 here, but it's paired to an electric motor, and those combine, like I said, for 483 horsepower. Now, before we move on to talking about the dimensions of these cars, how they stack up size-wise, it is important to note the X5 does get better fuel economy, if that's an important consideration for you. So 23 city, 27 highway, 25 combined for 40i X5s. In the X7 40i, it's 21 city, 25 highway, 22 combined. So there are noticeable fuel economy differences. You will be getting better gas mileage in the X5. So if you're somebody that's super fuel conscious, that might be something to consider. But those are the powertrains, all the information regarding those. Let's move on to size, which is a big item that differentiates the X5 from the X7. All right, let's talk about size and the differences in size between X7 here and the X5, which is hiding behind the X7, which is a good indicator of the size differences. The X7 is pretty significantly bigger in all dimensions except for one. So let's talk about the basic exterior dimensions, length, width, and height. Now, I do have a little cheat sheet here, lots of numbers to remember, so pardon me if you see me looking at the cheat sheet. I'll try to cover up all my lack of eye contact with some B-roll so you guys can actually see the cars, not me looking at this piece of paper. But let's start with length. The X5 is 194.2 inches long, X7 is 203.6 inches long. So X7 definitely noticeably bigger there, and as we move into interior dimensions in a little bit, you'll see that a lot of that increase in length for the X7 goes towards its cargo capacity, which is really significantly more than the X5. Width, X5 is 78.9, X7 is 78.7, so the X7 is actually a little bit narrower than the X5, which is interesting. You wouldn't really expect that because the X7 is bigger in every other exterior dimension, but the X5 is just a little bit wider than the X7. Height, X7 is 72.2 inches high for the X7, 69.5 inches high for the X5. So X7 about 3 inches higher than the X5, and that makes sense. Now, all of those exterior dimensions, when you go and look at these cars in person, those sound like small numbers. We're talking about, 2, 3, 4 inch differences, but they really make a difference. And when you look at both of these cars parked next to each other in a showroom, out on the road, in a parking lot, or wherever, you're going to notice the X7 definitely looks bigger. It has much more visual presence. It looks and feels like a significantly bigger car because it is, as we saw from the numbers, but they sort of make the difference seem a little bit smaller than it really is. Visually, at least, the X7 definitely looks quite a bit bigger than the X5, and interior dimensions tell a similar story, small numbers, but relatively big differences. So with that said, let's go ahead and hop inside both cars and talk about how they compare as far as interior dimensions, how well you and your family and your passengers might fit in either car. All right, here I am sitting inside of our X5. Now, we'll talk about the main interior dimensions, that is legroom and headroom, and of course at the end we'll hop in the trunk and talk about cargo capacity, because that is really important and a big difference between both cars as well. So front legroom in the X5, 39.8 in the X5, and 39.8 in the X7. So both cars share the same front legroom, so no difference there. Front headroom, however, the X7 gets a little bit of an advantage, 41.9 inches in the X7, 40.7 in the X5. So obviously that is the distance between the base of the seat and the roof. You will have a little over an inch more headroom in the X7. Both cars are pretty big. Both cars have plenty of headroom. I don't think anybody, unless you're really incredibly tall, is going to have any problem, and I mean like 7 feet tall, is going to have any problem sitting in either of these cars. They both have plenty of headroom, so there's a difference there, but it's mostly not going to affect anyone except for the super, super tall folks out there. All right, now we're in the back seat of the X5. Let's talk about rear interior dimensions. So in the X5, you have a rear legroom measurement of 37.8, 37.6 in the X7. So on paper, at least, the X5 actually has more standard rear legroom. Rear headroom, the advantage does go to the X7 by about a half an inch, 39.4, 39.9. So again, both cars have plenty of rear headroom. Really not going to be an issue unless you're super tall. Legroom, maybe if you have two people sitting behind each other. But as you can see, I'm in the back of the X5 here. Obviously the rear seat is not adjustable forward and backward, but the front is, and it's positioned exactly where I would put it as a driver. I have just plenty of room, absolutely no problem as far as space goes, and this is the X5. X7, obviously same story, but those are the interior dimensions for front and back passengers. Let's move into the trunk to talk about cargo capacity. All right, here we are around back of the X7 to talk about cargo capacity, which is where these two cars, the X5 and the X7, are probably the most different in terms of dimensions, and it's the place where consumers will probably notice the biggest difference and maybe make a decision based on that difference, because it is significant. So in the X7, with the second row in place but the third row folded down, you have 48.6 cubic feet of cargo capacity. In the X5, you have 33.9 in that same situation. So third row, which doesn't exist in the X5, folded down, but that second row, most importantly, in place. 33.9 versus 48.6 in the X7. Big difference in cargo capacity, but the difference is magnified even more when we talk about second row folded down. So in the X7, you get 90.4 cubic feet of cargo capacity with the second row folded down. In the X5, you only get 72.3. Now, 72.3 in the X5 is still a pretty significant number. Plenty of cargo capacity for the vast majority of people and their use cases for the car. But if you're somebody with lots of kids, maybe going to and from college, carrying a lot of larger items in your car, you are going to notice that the X7 is significantly better suited for that job. And just visually, we're going to put in clips of both the X5 and the X7's trunks. You can see the X7 just looks a lot bigger, and it is a lot bigger in the back. So definitely more space for carrying things in the X7. And this one doesn't really matter nearly as much, but payload-wise, the X7 is 1,261 pounds and 1,058 for the X5, so about a 200-pound difference in payload, and that is the maximum amount of weight that both cars can safely carry. Not that most people are getting really close to that anyway, but worth mentioning just to be thorough. So with the X7, while we're back here talking about cargo capacity in this area, there's one thing that's really important to talk about that differentiates the X7 from the X5, and for many people, this is the main reason they go for an X7 over an X5. That is, the X7 is available with a third row, so it can seat up to 7, 2 in the front, 3 in the middle row if equipped to the bench, and 2 more in the back. Whereas the X5 is not available with a third row at all. The most people you can seat in an X5, no matter how you equip it, is 5, 2 in the front, 3 in the back. So the X7 has a third row, X5 does not. And the X7, talking about its third row, is really, really nice, its third row. So it has heated seats, it has its own climate control, it has USB chargers, it has cup holders. So the third row in the X7, if equipped with a climate comfort package, that is, if equipped properly, the X7 has a really nice and spacious third row. I've sat in it myself at about 5'9". I can sit in the third row, no problem, perfectly comfortable. So that is an important difference if you're thinking about X5 versus X7. It's important to know if you need a third row, your only option is the X7. BMW used to make the X5 the third row, they don't anymore. So if you need a third row, stop right here, X7's the one for you. But if not, keep watching and figure out the differences between X5 and X7, because besides the third row, that's really the only thing you can only get on the X7. There are a couple things like rear steering and whatnot that you can only get on the X7, but substantial differences. Third row only available on X7, so worth noting. Those are the basic dimensions of both cars. We talked about the engines. Now let's hop in each one and just talk about some more subjective things. How does each car feel when you're sitting in it? How do they drive? And how do they differ from a subjective standpoint rather than objective on paper numbers? So let's hop in the X7 first, and then we'll move into the X5 and talk about the differences in that regard. All right, here we are inside of the X7, and for this part of the video, like I said, I just want to talk about some of the subjective differences in feel, how all those numbers that I kind of spit out at you might materialize and come together in the subjective feeling of the car. How do you feel when you sit in it and drive it? Does it feel as big as the numbers suggest? Stuff like that. So we'll just start off with the size, because that is the biggest difference, and feel-wise, the X7 does feel substantially bigger than the X5. Now, when you look at the actual numbers, you know, like I said earlier, it's only a couple inches here and there. Not huge differences, but sitting in the car, standing outside the car, the X7 does feel significantly bigger. When you're sitting in the car, I adjusted my driving position to be equal in both cars, where I would sit in both cars, and I feel like I have a more commanding view out in front of me in the X7. I feel like I'm sitting higher up. I feel like I just, more of that kind of king of the road feeling that you get in big SUVs. You get that in the X7. You don't really get it in the X5. So you do feel like you're driving a bigger car in the X7. As far as placing the car on the road, I'd say the X7 is a little bit more difficult to park, place in a lane, even though it's narrower. I think part of sitting up high is you don't really get as good a feel for the corners of the car. I feel that way in the X7. I'm more comfortable like backing an X5 into our showroom in those tight areas than I am an X7, because maybe of the length, it's shorter overhangs. You have less length to deal with by a big amount in the X5. So worth noting that the X7 does feel a little bit more cumbersome in tight areas than the X5 does. As far as sitting in the car, so to summarize, the exterior dimensions, the X7 does feel a lot bigger. The X5 feels a little bit tighter, like it's shrunk around you a little bit better, feels more manageable in tight spaces, but that's not to say the X7 doesn't feel unmanageable. Perfectly fine if you're used to driving big cars, Tahoes, Yukons, things like that, then you'll get in the X7 and it'll feel totally normal. Sequoias, Land Cruisers, Mercedes, GLS, cars like that. So that's the exterior. Let's talk about the interior. So sitting in both cars, at least from the amount of space that I have as a driver, I don't feel any difference between X5 and X7. Now, like we said before, there are small differences in size, legroom, headroom, and whatnot, but when I'm sitting here, I feel like I have just as much space in either car, and that's because, you know, you do, in large part, you know, they're pretty similar size-wise, but on paper, and they feel pretty similar size-wise when you're actually sitting in the car. So not really a ton to talk about there. Sitting in the driver's seat, they feel equally sized. Sitting in the back, now this is interesting because the X5 actually on paper has more legroom, but it feels like the X7 has more legroom. So I'm not sure where I went wrong there feeling that, because the numbers are telling me that my feeling is wrong, but just telling you guys how I feel about it. I do think I fit a little bit more easily in the back of the X7 for whatever reason. It could be just the shapes on the back of the seats make you feel like you have more space visually, even if you really don't. But subjectively, I think the X7 feels a little bit bigger in the back. It could be because when you look out, forward and backward, specifically backward, you see tons more space. So maybe it just feels more spacious, even though the physical inches, the measurements are a little bit, you know, in the opposite direction of what you're feeling. But cargo capacity wise, the X7 is, you know, subjectively, objectively on paper, feel-wise, just way bigger than the X5. The X7's cargo space is cavernous. You can put anything you could ever possibly want to put in a car back there. Tons and tons and tons of space in the back of the X7. So that is the space stuff in the X7. Now, as far as feel goes from a sort of materials perspective, they do feel very similar. However, from a driving perspective, the X7 definitely feels more geared towards luxury. Think 7 Series versus 5 Series. Same difference between X5 and X7. Now, we'll talk about the way the X5 drives a little bit more when we sit in it, but the X7 is super smooth, really delicate, smooth, like buttery inputs. The steering wheel is really easy to turn. The brake is super progressive and soft. The throttle, the way the engine is tuned, it's all very smooth and comfortable in the X7. It feels like a luxury car, a dedicated luxury car. It feels extremely comfortable to sit in and drive. It does feel big, but part of that sort of matches its driving experience, because the 7 Series feels big, but it's super comfortable and luxurious to drive. Same for the 7 Series. The suspension, the X7, I'm sorry. The suspension in the X7, they all come with air suspension, which is not true of the X5. Much more compliant, a lot softer and more comfortable over bumps and imperfections in the pavement. So overall, the X7 is definitely more of a luxury car in terms of driving feel. Materials quality wise, you know, I'm maybe not being as scrutinizing as some other people might be, but I really can't tell much of a difference. I think the X5 feels just as well built, just as screwed together, just as nice from a materials perspective as the X7. And that's good for the X5, it's good for the X7. BMW's build quality is really nice. So materials wise, not a big difference. That is where it's not like 7 Series versus 5 Series. The 7 Series has a much more liberal use of high-end materials compared to the 5 Series. That difference doesn't translate to the SUVs. I think the X5 and the X7 feel very similar in terms of their materials and their build quality. That's the X7. Let's hop in the X5 and talk about all the same stuff we just talked about, but in that car. All right, sitting in the X5, first thing you'll notice, like I said, the big difference is size. You notice that right away sitting down in the X5. It just feels like the car is closer to you, the corners are closer to you. You just feel like you're driving a smaller car because you are. And the big place that I notice that is backing the cars up onto our patio, into and out of our showroom, tight parking spots, places like that. You really notice that the X5 is different and smaller than the X7. It's just significantly easier to place the front and back bumpers, the corners, to really get a feel for where the corners are in the car in the X5. So you do feel like you're driving a smaller car. You feel like you're sitting down a little bit lower as well. You definitely don't have as high up of a seating position in the X5 as you do in the X7. So if you like that, go for the X5. If you don't want to feel like you're driving a big car, you feel like you're driving a big car in the X7, if you want to avoid that feeling, definitely go for the X5. Now, as far as handling goes, speaking about driving bigger, smaller cars, generally smaller cars handle better than bigger cars do, and that is true with X5 versus X7 as well. Now, the X7 is perfectly competent on pretty much whatever situation you might throw at it, being a full-size SUV, but the X5 definitely feels like it's a little bit happier to be thrown into a corner aggressively on an on-ramp, on a back road or something like that. The X5 is definitely going to be a more willing companion for driving like that compared to the X7. X7 feels fine in those situations. It's not where that car excels. It's not where the X5 really excels either, but the X5 is definitely better at that sort of stuff than the X7. It feels a little bit more nimble, a little bit more quick on its feet, a little bit lighter. It is about 500 pounds lighter, so worth noting that the X5 handles a little bit more athletically. Acceleration-wise, they feel just about the same. I can't tell a difference. X540 versus X740, same with the M60. They feel about the same. Now, like I said, build quality-wise, they again feel about the same. I really don't notice any substantial differences in materials or build quality between each cars, which is really good. It's good that a car as upmarket as the X7 feels just the same as the X5. That bodes really well for the X5. Speaks volumes about its interior quality. As far as the interior dimensions go, like I said, I fit the same in both cars. I can't notice a difference in how I feel space-wise in either car. I feel just as spacious, and I feel like I have just as much space in the X5 as I do in the X7. Knee room, headroom. Looking forward, I can't really notice a difference in space. In the back, I do think the X5, like I said, feels a little smaller. The numbers don't agree with me there, but just telling you guys how, I feel subjectively. I do think the X7 feels more spacious than the X5 does. Cargo capacity wise, you definitely look at it and think you can fit way more stuff in the X7 because you can. Much bigger cargo space there. Those are the interior dimensions. The way they drive are similar, but the X5 definitely feels a little bit sportier, more athletic, but it does ride a little bit more harshly. The X7 is geared almost exclusively on the spectrum of comfort to performance. The X7 is very far towards comfort, whereas the X5 is a little bit closer to the middle. Definitely still erring towards comfort, but closer to the middle, at least in 40i trim. So those are the subjective feel differences. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what the two cars are like to drive and what they're like to sit in and live with. Speaking of living with, storage space up front in both cars is the same. You have the same sort of cubbies in the middle, same center console opening here, same door pockets, and all the same storage space. So up front at least. Cargo capacity obviously different, like we said, but those are the subjective differences between X5 and X7. So let's hop outside and we'll wrap up. All right, so that's going to do it for this comparison between the 2023 X7 and the 2024 X5. So like I said in the beginning of the video, these cars were both just refreshed. So everything I said in this video, unless BMW sort of pulls the rug out from under us and changes one of these cars without us expecting it, everything I said will remain true for years to come because the X7 and the X5 both have some life cycle in front of them. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this comparison between X5 and X7. Hopefully it gave you some actionable consumer advice, some advice and some information that you can really use when you're actually deciding between X5 and X7. And once you've made your decision, or if you need some help in person, you want to check them out in person to make your decision, please give us a call. Stop by at 111 Ridgedale Ave or call 973-455-0700. We will be happy to hook you up with either myself or one of our client advisors or one of our other product specialists to go over the X5 and the X7, really make sure that you're comfortable in the car that you end up choosing. But that's going to do it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching. Really appreciate your support with our YouTube channel. Please like the video if you think we deserve it and subscribe to the channel. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at BMW of Morristown. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, questions about this video, please drop those down in a comment below. But that's going to do it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.